Greetings my chess friends, Robbie here, and I have with you a little game that I read in a book, How to Think Ahead in Chess by Israel Horrowiz and Fred Reinfeldt. And it's a fairly old chess book, first published in the 1950s I think. It's in descriptive notation, but it has this very interesting little Stonewall attack game, and it's Horowitz versus an amateur player. Now the Stonewall begins with the move d4. Black replies d5, and this is an interesting move. It's a type of waiting move. White is waiting to see what black will do. Of course, he seeks to put his pawn here, and this gives us the Stonewall formation, but it's just waiting to see what black does. Black plays knight to f6 and bishop to d3. And the idea of the Stonewall attack is quite simple. We will have an iron grip on the e5 square once we play our pawn to f4, and we'll use our pieces to attack these light squared weaknesses on the king side. We have the goal of putting a knight on e5, again attacking these weaknesses and driving off this knight, which of course defends the vulnerable h7 square. So these are very simple ideas in the Stonewall. The things that we need to look out for is a knight coming into e4, and we have various ways that we can prevent that. So let us look at the game. e6, knight d2, and this prevents the knight coming into e4. Attacking the centre, white defends the centre, putting knight on an active post, and here black of course threatens to advance his pawn to e5, completely freeing his game. And of course we can prevent this with the move f4, and here we see the Stonewall formation. These pawns here give this opening its name, Stonewall. Bishop to e7. Now, it's hardly likely that the bishop is essentially biting on granite in d6, so black decides to put it on e7 instead. Knight to f3. This knight of course is destined to come to e5, where it controls these squares, this complex here that we're seeking to control and infiltrate. Black castles, knight to e5. The case of knight takes knight and pawn takes knight is to white's advantage, because this knight will of course be forced to move. Queen to c7. The idea of this is simply to anchor this knight so that black can play b6 and fianchetto his bishop along this diagonal. White castles. Black begins his idea of fianchettoing the queen's bishop. g4. Beginning the attack immediately. The idea of course is to play to g5 and dislodge this knight, which of course is a protector of the light squares, especially this very vulnerable square on h7. Bishop to b7. And here we need to be careful, because this has an indirect influence over the e4 square. Black is in fact threatening knight takes knight and then planting a knight in on e4. But we have resources to cover that and play the excellent queen to f3. Now this knight will never be able to come to the e4 square. This is a kind of prelude to a queenside attack. I'm not entirely sure what the purpose of it is, but it was played anyhow. g5. The bold defender of the kingside is forced to flee to the safety of e8. And I'd like you to pause the video for a moment. We have complete control of these dark squares. We're seeking to attack these light squares with our pieces. And if you were white, can you see a knockout move? Try and calculate it out to its culmination. And the move that was played in the game was bishop takes h7. King takes h7. Queen to h5. King goes back. And already we can see the weakness of these light squares. g6 no longer has the defender, and h7 is defended solely by the king, who himself is a very poor defender. Rook to f3, planning rook to h3 and checkmate. The bold pawn steps forward to take the place of its now lost brother. The queen steps forward into the bedchamber of the king. Knight to g7. Rook to h3, threatening checkmate. The knight tries to interpose itself, and again we remember our strategy. It is these light squares here that we are trying to control. So can you see a move that does that? Well, the move that was played in the game was excellent. Knight sacrifice. Nice. Knight takes g6. And the last vestiges of these light squared defenders are gone. Knight returns. Rook to h7, threatening checkmate. Bishop comes to d6, trying, of course, to let the queen have some influence on the g7 square. But white has many ways to get black into a mating net. The idea behind this move is, of course, to play pawn to g6 and rook to h8, checkmating the black king. Bishop takes, trying to stall, of course, the move g6 by pinning this pawn. Pawn takes, rook takes, and the pawn moves up into the mating net. There are many ways for white to win here, but I love this next move. Knight to f3, sacrificing the knight to gain mobility for the queen's bishop and the queen's rook to enter the game. Rook takes, bishop to h6. Rook comes back, and before this move, in fact, black resigned. But of course, after bishop takes, white has a devastating discovered attack on the king. And if the rook takes, I suspect there's many ways for white to win. Just by way of example, and white has won. So this is an example of the Stonewall attack. It's a very simple idea, but it can be very, very effective against an unprepared opponent. And I hope you enjoyed that game. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it in this little publication, How to Think Ahead in Chess. And I thank you very, very much for taking the time for watching this video, and wish you well with your own chess.